is I watched a documentary on Hulu. Both of these are on Hulu. I'm not sponsored by Hulu, but I like Hulu. Um, I watched the documentary American Rapstars, which I believe came out this year. Uh, it was, it was, I didn't know what to expect. Um, One of the main reasons I actually clicked on it and was curious about it was because XXX Tentacion was basically the thumbnail for the documentary. So I was like, I watched the X documentary that was on Hulu about his life. What's this about? Like, what is this? Like, is it about him? Like, what is this exactly? So I decided to watch it, and it was not necessarily what I was expecting. It was really, really good though. Um, so it basically broke down how the music industry has changed over the past 10 years in particular. And one of the main reasons was streaming and SoundCloud, and how um like all these streaming platforms and everything in the 2000s changed rap in general and allowed records to come up ridiculously that no one it allowed people to, like, Napster. This was before my time, but Napster being around and allowing people to download music for free and like do all this stuff was like revolutionary at the time. It threw a wrench in the gears of the music industry, and it allowed stuff that people actually wanted to listen to or thought was good to actually be listenable and found. Where back in the day, you were basically pushed whatever the music industry and the labels were pushing when it came to CDs and what they had available for you to buy. So basically, the people that were popular were kind of put there because there's only shit you could listen to. Where when the internet came up, it kind of allowed a whole new wave of music, which I guess I never really thought about at the time, because all this would have been happening to begin with when I was real young. And it's like, looking back at it, I was like, when I was watching it, I was like, fuck, buying CDs for every artist. I was like, that would be hell on earth. It's like, I'd spend so much goddamn money on music, and to try finding shit that I don't know I like, to buy a fucking CD that maybe I like 2 or 3 songs off the record, and or if I just don't like any of them, fuck. I would have hated it. So thank God for the internet and allowing stuff to be like it is now with, I guess, Amazon Music, but who uses that? Spotify in particular, and like all these other platforms, Apple Music, all this shit. And it is really cool because you're able to listen to whatever it is you want. You can change up your genre. I love changing up my genre all the time. But one of the things they talked about was SoundCloud and how it really changed the music industry because it kind of became its own thing. It was like a shadow industry of music that not everyone knew about. And I mean, I heard of SoundCloud. I had heard of SoundCloud rappers and all this shit, but like I hadn't, I guess when a lot of this stuff was coming up, I wasn't on it. Like, fuck, I didn't download SoundCloud until 2019, and it was to listen to a coworker's song because he was trying to be a SoundCloud rapper. And it was interesting music, to say the least. Not the most impressive, but that was the only reason I originally downloaded SoundCloud. And like when X died and Lil Peep and like all these all this different stuff, it was very interesting. But so they talked about how SoundCloud kind of changed the music industry, because I didn't realize it wasn't until 2018 that the Billboard Top 100 started counting streams to like their algorithm and how they calculated the top songs. And that's one reason, like, when they started doing that, that's one reason where Look at Me in particular and some of X's songs started being on the top of the charts nationwide when he wasn't even necessarily known in the mainstream for the most part, but he was able to basically blow his name out of the water because of the like relationship he built with his fans and all this stuff, and how this guy talked about how like SoundCloud rappers in particular and all this stuff kind of changed what rap used to be, in the sense of like it's all about the music, it's all about the rap and all this other stuff, to it's more about the performance when people actually come and see you. Like, it's not necessarily about them listening to the music and enjoying the art. It's more about coming for the crazy performances and like people jumping off stage and all this stuff. Like, if anybody's seen videos of like any of X's performances, like jumping off of balconies and like all this crazy shit. And it was just, I think the whole thing was really interesting. Like, I'm trying to think who they all had come on. They had Smoke Perp, they had Lil Xan, they had Danielle Bregoli, or what's her? I don't know what her artist name is, but the girl, oh yeah, Mike, the girl that was Catch Me Outside, how about that? You know, like her, the girl from Dr. Phil, and they were all talking about different stuff, and it was also really interesting that like the majority of all these SoundCloud rappers and all these people came up all from South Florida. I don't know why that is. I don't know if part of it is just like the small venues and the crazy shit that happens down there and some of the stuff, but it was very, very interesting, and I didn't realize that, but like all these people came from South Florida, and like it was something I didn't realize, but kind of added up. Like, they talked about Lil Pump and all this stuff, and it was just kind of crazy that all this had stuff to do. I was actually very, very impressed with Danielle Bregoli's take on a lot of the shit when they interviewed her. I wouldn't necessarily say well spoken, but she was talking about some really deep stuff, and how she's like, I was kind of surprised considering she's in that crowd for the most part. She's like, all these people getting face tats and popping Xanax and like doing all this shit just to be cool and get famous and like get attention and all this shit. They're stupid. He's like, one of the main reasons that like all these people are getting the face tats and getting tattoos just absolutely everywhere and all this shit is basically like saying, I'm going all in on whatever it is I'm trying to do. Like, I want to be a rapper, I'm going to go all in. And by proving this in a way is by getting these face tats, because I can't necessarily go back. So it is pretty interesting that that whole concept to begin with. And like it was crazy, and like all these people taking pills, popping Xanax and like all this stuff. And like they ended up talking about like mental health a lot more than I was expecting. And one of the things they were talking about was like with all these kids like growing up with social media, most of them ending up traumatized or having a rough childhood to begin with, coming up in these terrible neighborhoods, just made them way more likely to then end up with some sort of addiction. And like all these guys taking Xanax and perks and like just everything. And it was kind of crazy because they were talking about all this and how like this is how they want to feel happy and all this shit. But then it's also, once they start taking this, it's the only way they can get happy, because like their body adapts and they become addicted. And it was very, very sad. Like, because then they were talking about that, and they brought up how X's death in general, which obviously his didn't have anything to do with drugs, but Lil Peep, Mac Miller, like all these different rappers basically overdosing off of fentanyl. Like, they were talking about fentanyl issues and Xans and, like, all these teenagers taking drugs because they think it's cool. And it is very interesting because I actually just listened to Colin Samir kind of talk about something similar, in the sense of how they were like, I realize now as a creator, we got to basically get out and do more and be involved in more shit. So we have more lessons and more scenarios to learn and talk about and do stuff with. And it's kind of like the same, even for me, I feel like with this podcast a little bit, it's like if I don't keep growing as a person by reading more, by learning new stuff, by having experiences, by going places, by doing stuff, by creating stories, by educating myself in some way, it's like I can't necessarily bring stuff back to here. If I just sat around, did nothing, didn't read, didn't watch movies, didn't do anything along these lines, I'm not going to be able to bring new shit to the table, and I'm not going to be able to grow and develop as a person. And it was kind of very similar, because Smoke Perp was talking about how, like, one of the main reasons he did all these drugs was he's like, it's like, I can't necessarily make a song about running guns and doing all this shit and doing, like, he used some other examples, but that was like the main ones, because he was like, I didn't do it. I haven't robbed a place. I haven't done this shit. The thing I have done is a bunch of fucking drugs and a bunch of pills. So he's like, that's what my songs are going to end up being about and have a big influence on, because he's like, if I can't talk about shit I haven't done. And so it was kind of crazy to kind of also see the feedback loop of how, like, you can't talk shit about something you haven't been able to do. So they had to basically ruin themselves and get addicted to kind of fit in a way, to fit in the industry and the genre and all this stuff, to kind of, like, do stuff. But then at the same time, that even Lausanne, he's like, I realized I've promoted some terrible shit, and the stuff that the next generation's going to deal with anxiety, with drugs, and all this shit, it's going to be terrible. And I didn't realize he's only 22, but it, like, just some of the shit. And it was very interesting. I think Smoke Perp actually is clean. He smokes weed, but I think that's it. Like, he doesn't do anything else. And that kind of surprised me, but it was so different than what I necessarily was thinking going into that book, going into that documentary, because I was not necessarily expecting the topic to be so in depth and deep, but at the same time, it's so sad, because it's also just another version of dealing with death, anxiety, stress, and opioids. That's a big fucking issue in the United States.